Man, what's good? Should Christians pride themselves on being friends with sinners? Does the Bible or Jesus himself attribute this characteristic to Christ? What is the relationship between believers and unbelievers, and what does that look like in 2025? We're tackling these questions and more on this episode of 520 IXC for Monday, January 13th, 2025. It's our first show of the year, y'all. What's good? What's good?
Season
Before
2.
we get into this topic, though. Yeah, season dose, I guess. Deuces. Katie's out. Before we get into it, I want to run it around the horn and introduce you to the squad that's hanging out with us here tonight. Starting with our very special guest joining us, Mr. Jeremiah Bligen. What's good, sir?
Peace and salute. Thanks for having me. Doing well. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, man. Real quick, let them know who you are, man.
Yeah, Jeremiah Bligen here, Carolina native. I am an artist, husband, father, all of the good things, man. Been rocking out for a while now, doing music, man, and walking with the Lord for a couple decades now. So just a man of God, a brother in the faith, trying to press forward and use his gifts, to the glory of God, and be faithful with his witness. So glad to be here.
Love it, man. Glad we're here. I know we're going to be talking about some of that music here in a little bit, man. Looking forward to that. Big Swiss is here. What's good, Swiss?
It's been a busy day. I got a busy week. It's my wife and I's 10-year anniversary on Thursday.
Congratulations.
It's her birthday on Wednesday, and I'm going to be at staff retreat all week. So I work at a church, and we always do a staff retreat second week of January to start the year off, and it just happened to line up this week that way. So, but other than that, I'm good. I'm excited for tonight. I'm DJing an event at the staff retreat, and so been working on a nice CHH playlist for that I'm pretty proud of. And I'm also doing a PowerPoint party where I'm going to make the argument that Gene Wilder and Willy Wonka is actually Old Testament Yahweh. And I have an airtight argument.
Katie has a problem. What up, KD? What up, Katie? Talk to the people. Say hi.
Man, we was going great until Swiss pulled that out of his hat, man. And you couldn't move your wife's birthday around, bro. You couldn't move it for the next week. You know what I'm saying? You couldn't say, hey,
we're going out of town we get back Thursday, which is our actual anniversary. We get back pretty early, and then her and I'm swapping cars, and we're driving up to Oklahoma for the weekend, stay at a cabin, and just the two of us. So
you ain't supposed to tell people where you're going, bro, just in case. You know what I'm saying? So
Oklahoma's a big state, and we all carry guns, so you're welcome to try and find me.
All right, never mind. Anyway.
Dude, Katie's from Chicago. He ain't scared, man. He ain't scared. So.
Nah. I ain't chasing Swiss down, man. Happy New Year. Everybody excited to kick off season 2. Thank you guys for rocking with us pretty much all of 2024. And yeah, man, excited to see what God will do in the new year. So appreciate y'all joining us.
Yeah, man.
I'm gonna switch my hat because I see Jeremiah's got his Art of Homage on, and I'm actually not. So
I just thought you were. I thought you were proud of those Sacramento A's, dude. I thought that's all that was. So
no, I'm gonna represent AOH. They are a Dallas native too company, so whenever I order, I get the hat the next day. It's great.
Nice. And for those of you who didn't rock with us all at 24, y'all some suckers. So I'm just kidding, man. We love y'all. Whatever. Let's dude. Yeah. I'm just gonna stop right there. Let's get into it, man. So this question came, and we had an interesting conversation about this in our Telegram chat. But this came about because of a picture I saw someone wearing a shirt that said "Friends with Sinners." It got me thinking: are Christians meant to be friends with sinners, man? So I'm gonna throw that out there. Whoever wants to kick us off, man. I've got some points. I've been doing a little research. I know that's shocking. But yeah, man, I'm gonna let someone else get us rolling though. KD, you got a church hoodie on.
Bro, come on, man. As with anything and almost everything present day, people are heavy on context, right? Extremely. And I've always said, don't let the context kill the content, because we will murder scripture to try to prove that God was not talking to us or something that's not applicable to us, which I think is absolutely reckless. However, I think a statement like this does have to be placed in context, because what we can't do, and one of the things that I hate that people do, is like with 1 Corinthians 9, where Paul talks about becoming all things to all men, that he might save some, that he might gain some.
Romans 14.
I think we take that like to the umpteenth degree and feel as though it's okay to still, smoke squares. Or, hey, I'm witnessing. Hey, let's go have a drink. But dog, I'm witnessing. Well, let's go to the club. But bro, I'm witnessing while I'm twerking, and just there's certain things that are impossible to do. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways, and sometimes we don't apply scripture properly when it comes to stuff like this. And so I think we really have to be careful and responsible when we say things like this, because being friendly towards unbelievers or sinners is not the same as being friends with them. And I think friend is something that, Jesus calls us friend. I think friend we throw around way too loose. But again, you have to watch what you're stepping into, because in any scenario or situation, you're either drawing or being drawn. So I'll pause right there.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying,
Eric's on his delay.
Oh, sorry.
He's on that Kansas internet.
Yeah, like Starlink.
No, that was the question I asked in the chat too, though. Is there a difference? And was Jesus friends with sinners, or was he friendly to them? So I'm glad you brought that up. Go ahead, Swiss, and then I'll follow up.
Yeah, I think it's how do you define sinner and how do you define the action is the context, right? Like, one of my best friends who I talk to every day is a Muslim. Like, I believe he's being lied to by Satan. One of another friend in that same group is finally starting to ask questions about God after years of atheism. And who's the first person he came to talk about it with? Me. Because he trusted me and he knew I wasn't going to laugh at him or say, I told you so. Now, and then I have another set of friends from that kind of same California life when I used to live in California, who, I'll go to their bachelor parties and all that, but if they end up doing anything silly, I'm like, I'm going back to the house. I'm good. I remember one year they went to a strip club and I had alone time with the bachelor, and I said, hey man, you do not have to do this. Like, this isn't going to honor your wife. This isn't going to honor you. If you're just doing it to make them happy, that's not a good enough reason. And he chose to ignore that advice. And I was like, cool, I'm going back to the crib. Y'all have fun. But I didn't say have fun because I didn't want him to have fun. But you know what I mean? Like, I'm okay being an outcast in my own friend group because I'm not willing to lose my compromise on my faith and my values just to make them happy. And they know that. And that's why they respect the fact that I do operate the way I do, because I'll still tell the truth and I'll be firm where I need to be firm. And I'll call people out if they say GD or whatnot. And now they know, like, hey, this is just a boundary that I'm not willing to have. And if you value our friendship, you'll follow these boundaries. And they do, for the most part, honor those boundaries. And so it's an opportunity for one day for someone like this Jeremy friend, who I've been friends with for 20 years and have heard him say God is the greatest literary villain of all time, to call me and say, hey man, I'm starting to feel this spiritual thing. I don't know what's going on, but I want to go to a church and I feel like Christianity is the only true thing that could be out of all the religions. Can you help me? And now we're having the most interesting conversations I've had with this guy in 20 years. And so, am I friend to this sinner? Absolutely. But I don't endorse his sin, and I never involve myself with the sin, and I don't tempt myself by putting myself in a position in which I could be in sin as a result of being their friend. And then also it's easy because they all still live in California, but either or, like, there's boundaries that they respect.
I think, okay, so we see it like we said on T-shirts, we see it on little posters on the wall or whatever, right? Because it sounds good to say, oh, Jesus was friends with sinners. Here's my question to y'all. Is that what the Bible says? So so that term's mentioned twice, right? It's mentioned twice and one in Luke 7, one in Matthew 11. They're both talking about the same situation,
same story. Yep.
Right. And what's the context that it's being used in? It's being used as a mockery by the religious leaders of Christ. Now,
it's not a commandment,
right? And that goes back to the whole idea of Jesus. I think was friendly with them, but when you look at his inner circle, who's the people he kept close to him? Who's the people he kept tight and had those private moments with? And we can even break it down a little bit further, right? Because even within the disciples, there was even, it seemed like, an even smaller circle, right? Yep. Jeremiah, what do you think, man?
Yeah, no, I think good stuff from everybody. I think that it is important to establish context and define terms. I think a lot of this is going to be dependent on what you define as a friend. We really are very loose with the term friend. People would say friend when really you're just talking about associate that you're friendly with. There's kindness there's niceties, you're exchanging surface level connection, which is perfectly fine, nothing wrong with that. But friendship implies like a deeper level of like connection, and availability to one another. For me, you know what I'm saying? And I think that defining that will determine the answer to it and then also the width in there, because I think there's a difference between being a friend to somebody and being friends with somebody. Because you can be a friend to somebody, and that means that you're giving all of the friendship quality traits and you're making those friendly deposits, right? You're being a friend to them, but they're not really able sometimes even to be a friend back to you and reciprocate that. So you're not really friends with them because you're not really doing it together. You're just a friend to them. And so I think all of those kind of terms, feed into the answer to the question of if we can we even be, and I think that you're spot on, right, with when it comes to Jesus and being friends with the world, that they were trying to mock him. But even if you use, go ahead.
No, you got it. Finish up your thought.
And so even if you use Jesus as an example, when he was like just dealing with the people, he also came on very heavy-handed sometimes with people and sent some pretty inflammatory things to them, that really kind of tested their faith and humility, that either you can respond with, even the dog wants the crumbs from the table, of the master, and be humble, or reject him and turn away from him because his words sting so much, and so he was walking in truth with them, but he wasn't participating and partaking. And even when we look at James 4, and I'll stop here because I know I can ramble and go on for a while, which is why my album's so long. but even within James 4, when he talks about, friendship with the world, enmity, to be an enmity with God, like that's talking about like, what does friendship with the world mean? The desires of the flesh. The world is not representing like necessarily individual people. It's more so about the desires of the flesh and what makes you worldly, and identifying with those things and wanting to be a part of that. And so I think like defining all of those terms, and really considering context and what the goal is with all of our interactions and relationships, helps us kind of establish a baseline to live from.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said some of the things you said, because one thought that I had that I put down here in my notes, and it kind of goes along with what you say. It also leads into kind of what KD was saying earlier too. Here is that when we look at Christian culture and we look at the people in it, and especially if we break it down to, the last show we were talking about Christian creatives, right? Whether you are talking about a podcaster, a YouTuber, an art, musician, whatever, right? That I think in some of those spaces is where we see stuff, as Katie was saying, kind of get twisted a little bit more, because I think that comes from this sense of needing to be accepted or validated by unbelievers, by the world, right? And Christ's interactions with those individuals had nothing to do with validation. His interaction was simply, hey, this is what I have to offer you. I have salvation. I've got life to give you. And that's what drove him. It wasn't him looking for them to say, oh, hey, didn't you do so good on your little talk today? You know, and that's, I think, where we have trouble is we want people to tell us we're doing good and we're all right. You know, Katie, go ahead.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I think everybody's made good points. But I think for us as believers, it's always going to be a good thing for us to define things the way that God does. Right. And so, again, because the world wants things to be ambiguous, where with God, there's no ambiguity. God says sin is sin, then it's sin. If God said that this is good and what you should chase after, then that's what we should be pursuing. There's a scripture that says, how can two walk together except they agree? In any friendship, there's an agreement because it's a covenant relationship. And we're talking about now the way that God looks at relationships versus the way that man does. Man is just really simply transactional when it comes down to relating with one another, right? This is where we learn how to love or interact based on condition. When we talk about the way that God sets up and establishes things, because it's the relationship that he has with us, that covenant relationship, it's an agreement. And if I'm going to be a part of it, then I've got to agree to be a part of it. And when I come into the agreement, I can't agree to be part of some of it. When I come into the covenant, I'm agreeing to be a part of all of it. And so we find danger zones within that. So now let's build additional scripture on top of that. If you lay down with a harlot, you become a harlot. Why? Because the two, they say, become one flesh. Same thing with you get married. Man leaves his parents, cleaves, and the two become what? It's that relationship. It's that agreement. And so a lot of times we feel as though, so perfect example, and I'll now use this based on what Swiss said, because first of all, God doesn't send us if we're not capable of being in those particular situations, right? So if God know that I'm dealing with lust, he's definitely not sending me to the strip club. He's not even sending me to the parking lot, dog. Like, I'm not, you know what I'm saying? I don't get to sit outside and pass out flyers because some of the dancers might come outside. Like, we have to think about that, but we don't, because I think, like Jeremiah mentioned, we use it as an excuse for us. Now I'm going to blanket what I really want to do, what's still in my heart, and this provision for the flesh. I'm going to blanket it as outreach. I'm going to say, well, you know, if we don't go to where the sinners is at, and that's a little iffy, because now you want to go and proclaim the light of the gospel in a place that you haven't been sent. And a lot of the places that we want to go and not be sent are things and areas that are Satan's territory. And it's just not wise. We expose ourselves unnecessarily. It's not like going to the job, because every day you got to go to the job. We're talking about places that you choose to go, not places that you have to. So people you choose to be around. We see a lot of artists like, yo, you spend all your time waiting for an opportunity to be able to minister to these individuals. But what's going on all the other times? Drinking, smoking, kicking it, fornicating. You waiting for a window for years, and you're in this environment because one day I'm going to have that moment and I'm a witness to them, and it's going to be, but you've bided your entire time having your spirit defiled, having all of these other things that are contrary and in disagreement with who God called you to be, infiltrating your space. And you think that when the moment comes, that you're going to be able to muster up all of the scripture, you know, and all of the power of the Holy Ghost that's in you to be able to minister to this person and bring them to Christ. And your witness is already destroyed.
Yeah. I want to kick it over to Swiss real quick before I do, Swiss. I want to follow up on one thing that KD said there. He talked about people talking about being a light, right? And we've heard it from the top of CHH of how you going to be a light if you're not in the darkness, blah, 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 blah. I just want to point out specifically, and dude, there's a lot of scriptures, and if we want to get into some particular ones, let me know. But 2 Corinthians chapter 6 specifically tells us, what fellowship does light have with darkness? Mm-hmm. So, Swiss, go ahead.
And obviously I work in ministry, so I talk to all kinds of people all the time at work. Not in my day-to-day, because I'm a project manager, but in my week-to-week, definitely I interact with non-believers that just come into the church every day. And so that's just like an interesting opportunity. But they're coming to my home turf. I'm not going to them.
That's how it should be, right? Because when you're a city on a hill, that city on a hill that's lighting up, it's doing that because people can see it and they can go to it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I agree. I mean, I think the points y'all made about kind of our culture distilling down. Our culture has a problem with letting go of friendships that have gotten us, and that's the same reason why that conversation about listening to secular hip hop is so prevalent in our circles, because there are some who have, and this isn't me trying to say people who listen to secular hip hop aren't sanctified. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm just saying there's a level of like conviction that happens that's different in each one of us as we get more sanctified. And so I think you're seeing the same thing with the music industry as we do with people, because they're like, well, I've been friends with this person for so long. I've always gone to the strip club with them, or I've always done this with them. And like, I don't want to damage the relationship because I'm this new way. And I think we treat our art that way. Like we treat all these other things that way. And to something that you're saying, Katie, about being in the devil's playground, and something that I've been looking into a lot of lately is like on spiritual warfare, and how the guy who actually convicted me to stop listening to secular music was on Ruslan last week, and he wrote a book on spiritual warfare. And something he said on that podcast really struck me, because I've experienced it in the sense of like, to what you were saying, God's not going to put you in the situation where you're in the strip club parking lot, but Satan will send a demon to be like, hey man, it's not that big of a deal. You got your Bible in the car. You'll be fine. You know what I mean? And like, I'm not above thinking that like that's still happening today to people. Like, no, we cannot be possessed, but we can be tempted by the enemy, and the enemy will send multiple people to do that, and multiple ways that he can infiltrate you. And so I think we just believe that lie that this is okay because X. I mean, I catch myself doing it all the time. It's okay that I watch this show because I skip past the nudity scenes. I'll fast forward it, but is it edifying? No. And so I'm constantly having to like reevaluate myself, and then bring it up on somewhere like here to where I can have people publicly hold me accountable, not just my close circle of community groups. But also, if my friends do see this that aren't living in the light, and they do end up watching the show, they could see like how easy it is to be connected into a community that can hold you accountable, to remove those things that are a net negative for culture. And so, yeah, that would be my final thoughts on the matter. I don't know if I answered your question.
It's all conversation, man. I think part of the problem too is, especially with this world of like social media being like the thing we're focused on so much, right? Mm-hmm. And getting followers or getting friends, right? There's one thing that Proverbs tells us, right? It's like, hey, a person with a lot of friends, easy to be harmed, right? It's better to have a few close friends than a lot of friends too. So I think that's an interesting thing to consider when we're talking about this.
Yeah, and you're not offering the level of friendship I'm discussing about with my friend Jeremy. I don't offer that to strangers or walk-ins. It's like that's a level of friendship that's carried over from childhood that I've still been able to initiate, because I always knew, like, hey man, if I don't call this guy, I might not ever hear from him.
Yeah, but I think that's part of the message, though, that we're giving out to the world, and that's what leads us into, well, then if you, Christian, are going to be friends with sinners, then that means you got to be okay with what sinners do, right? You've got to affirm things, and you've got to sacrifice and bend and make concessions for certain things. So,
love the sinner, not the sin argument.
Right. KD, I know we're kind of coming up against it for you, man. You got any final things you want to hit on here?
If I can get my audio straight, I would be happy. Just, you could be sincere and be sincerely wrong. And this is where growth and maturity and development and allowing God to set the parameters for interaction and stuff like this is really important. because I think one of the things that we really fail to recognize is that just because we're saved, sanctified, filled with the Holy Ghost, doesn't mean that the enemy stops coming for us. And if I'm not growing and progressing, then that means I put myself in a position to where I'm more vulnerable than I ought to be, because I'm not. The Bible talks about, like in Hebrews, between the 5th and the 6th chapter, about kind of like arrested development. And individuals at a time when you should be able to teach other people these things, you have need of being taught again yourself, because there's things you're not applying, there's things that you allowed to slip, and there's things that ultimately you allowed the enemy to come in and steal from you because there were other things that were more important to you than having God's perspective. And that's a really big deal. So yeah, like, while we should go and make disciples, because I think we can do that anywhere. I always tell people, like, you don't need a church event to do outreach. Dog, this is supposed to be a lifestyle. So if you're at the grocery store, if you're on the job, like wherever you are,
Uber,
you're still Christian. You know what I'm saying? If you in the back of the Uber, you're like, hey dog, let me get that aux cord so I can pump in my playlist, because I don't want to listen to what you got playing. There are very, very, very simple and practical ways to be a witness. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't need a stage. I don't need a mic. I don't need those things. I need to live what I say I believe. And so, again, I think sometimes we try to advertise things about us that may not necessarily be true. It's cool. It's catchy. But by the same token, God is viewing things differently than we do. And I think it was mentioned earlier, true friendship does have a level of intimacy that we are responsible and accountable for. And so I would just really say tread lightly in regards to that. Be available, be present, be engaged when somebody needs you. Make yourself available, because you never know when they're going to come in contact with a true, authentic example of Christ in the flesh. And they need to see that. But again, by the same token, like, don't play around. Listen, don't, because now you're messing with people's lives, and that kicks things over into something entirely different.
Yeah, and you might be the only good example of Christianity in their lives, right? Like, the thing with my friend, he literally was like, all of my experience with Christianity has been negative except for you, and you're the only one that'll hold me to the fire. Like, literally. And I'm like, well, yeah, like, I love you. I love you enough not to fake it.
Facts.
Yeah, man. Jeremiah, I know you have been quiet for a minute, man. Anything you've been thinking of?
No, just listening, man. I think that, everybody's touched on really good points, and I just think context is so important, and sometimes we get into a trap of trying to make blanket statements, even on social media, about certain things. And people are really coming at it from different vantage points. And that's why community is so important. Being tapped in with people locally who actually do know your individual situation, that can give you counsel and wisdom for your situation and where you are. Because said artists who may have, a platform and a larger platform, and who's going to different events on a weekly basis, coming in contact with different environments, they may need a different word, not a different standard of living, right? Of righteousness, because our standard is the same. But wisdom might permit certain things or withhold certain things from them, that may not be an issue for said person who isn't going from state to state every other day, or is not in front of a million people. They may not have to have the same level of awareness or be on guard in a particular way, because they don't see the same types of challenges. And so the context is important for each of us, but the standard definitely is righteousness. And we want to always challenge ourselves and ask ourselves, am I walking in a manner worthy, before the Lord? You know what I mean? Am I being a stumbling block to this person that I'm trying to be a friend to, and am I able to sow seeds to them? Am I watering seeds, or am I maybe tilling up something that somebody else planted by my behavior, by going along with some of the things that they're doing? All of those things are questions that we constantly have to challenge ourselves on, and I think the context is important, and community is important, and it helps us, navigate along the way.
Well, and I'll add on. It's also important to make sure that we're in that word and we know what that word says. There's a lot of T-shirts and posters on the wall and stuff that feel good, that sound good, right? But let's stack it up and make sure it's accurate too, right? So, KD, man, I know you got an appointment you got to get to, man. Are you good? Where are you at on that?
Yeah, no, I'm about to bounce out, man. I appreciate y'all, Jeremiah. Thanks for hopping on with us, and hope to have you back soon, bro. Congrats on everything. Make sure you talk about your artwork too, bro, because that's how I know you as well as other stuff. Because you did a lot of stuff for like 3 and a bunch of other cats that I know, man. So make sure you pump that up, man. I love y'all, man, and we'll do it again soon.
See you, Katie.
Yeah, man.
Peace. Thank you, bro.
See you soon, Katie. See you soon. And while we're transitioning here, man, we got a couple things to make sure that you are aware of. If you are not already there, please make sure that you get signed up for our Substack, man. We've been sending some cool stuff out here since the beginning of the new year. We are in the middle of sharing our Wave Maker picks of 2024 as a staff with all of our subscribers, man. So last week we sent out our favorite albums and projects from 2024. We've got a new email going out to subscribers on Wednesday sharing our favorite singles of the year. So you want to make sure you get that right to your inbox. Also, last week we sent out an interview with the homie Brenson from God Chasers. He's got his 13th project, man, coming out this Friday. So we talked about it. All of our subscribers, they've already heard this interview a week ago, but the interview is up and live on our YouTube channel here starting. It went live today, man. So get a chance to go check that out. So lots of stuff hitting. Make sure you're plugged into the Substack so we can get that right to your inbox, man. We want to make sure that that's happening. But yeah, like I said, last week, Swiss, we sent out our list of our favorite projects, and I don't remember yours off the top of my head, but I can tell you this: the guy that's hanging out with us, Jeremiah Bligen, he was at the top of my list for not only projects, but his name probably pops up on my singles list as well. So we want to talk about this album, man. The Flames Will Not Consume You came out Q4 of 2024, man.
You really snuck it in, bro.
Dude, and let me tell you this, man. There's obviously with what we do, we get a lot of music sent to us, right? And it's hard you might check it out once and then you got to kind of move on to it. So it's like it takes a certain kind of project for me to go back to it. And man, yours has been one that I've been going back to on a regular basis, whether it's going into my classroom, working on some lesson plans, putting it on, whatever the case may be. So I want to talk to you about just the inspiration behind it, man, and kind of what helped shape the sonic experience with it. Because I think that's part of what made it stand out for me is like whenever I heard the single Remains, I was like, oh, hold on. This isn't what we typically hear in the CHH world, man. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, no, first, thank you, man. I really appreciate just the support and you tapping in with the project, and you guys sharing it and trying to shine a light on it. I really do value that. I appreciate that. That's not something that's owed to me. Like, even if you believe something is good or great, you're still not owed attention. And so I appreciate you guys for that. When it comes to just the Sonic's soundscape of the project, it started with a producer, J. Dot Music. We actually began the project as an EP. And it just so happened that my follow-up album to my first album, When Ravens Cry, I was already working on it with a producer, the same producer that did the Fighting Stance EP. I was already in Ravens writing songs for it, recording some stuff, had the name for it, and that kind of fell apart and didn't work out. And so we needed to start from scratch. And I'm like, okay, well, let me try to get an EP out just to have some content flowing with the team while I kind of reshuffle the deck for my album. And so I got some tracks from him, started writing, working on those. And of course, as you know, whenever you work with one producer, it tends to have, a similar song or sonic signature, and I was good with, 5, 6, 7 songs being, EP, sign it off and move forward. But as I began to create the project, I'm like, you know what? This all kind of fits with where I was going anyway, with my album. So let me go ahead and bring all of that together here and expand the tracks that I got from him and add on other records that I believe fit to what I wanted to do. And then once we got to, a place of feeling really good about the songs, it's like, okay, now I can put on my put on my post-production hat and say, let me go in and now really make all of these records, sound whole. Let me add to it to make it a song, and not just my lyrics with a beat,
Mm-hmm. How long, I'm interested. So I'm a project manager. I work with creatives all day. I've been in the video game industry, film industry, and I've always been a hip hop head since the 90s. And so the one process I've never had personal experience with is music, which is why I love interviewing artists as much as I can. So I'd love to hear what was that process like? Because, the way you're describing the way the project was built sounds very modular. Okay, I took from here, I was working on this, and then this felt okay, but then these work together, and you're kind of almost deconstructing the last few years of your work and putting it back together to your best work. But yet it all sounds like a very cohesive project. And so when I release my reaction to it, you'll see that's something I keep pointing out is I kept saying, is this the same producer through all the tracks? It just sounds so tight.
Yeah. And I think, and that's I'm glad to hear that. And I think me being a producer and being able to build songs and tracks from the bottom up kind of really serves that purpose, where when you have an ear, just like how, I believe an individual producer may have a signature and a sound. I think artists can bring that too. When you put on, writers, when you hear music and you connect to them, there's a trend, when you're in a certain mood or you're writing a certain way of types of tracks that you navigate to. So as you continue to connect with these different type of tracks and you're in that same kind of space, you'll find some consistency. And what has helped for me is being able to put on my producer hat and hear the similarities with those different tracks, the differences, right? But also the similarities, and then trying to chain them together in a way that have them speak to each other in the way that I hope my lyrical content is speaking from song to song. And so it's finding, it can be something very small to me that will connect to oh, that element right there feels like it works with this element. And so it could be two completely different producers, but maybe they use the same synth. Maybe they use this one note here, and I can leverage that note to piggyback into this next thing. And so it's really just connecting with songs and emotions too. Because sometimes it may not even necessarily be the thing that you hear, it's what you feel when you move from one thing to another that connects it for you, and just using kind of all of those things, I feel helps paint that picture of the whole.
Yeah. So now that we're in this conversation, I specifically wanted to talk about how impactful the connections of Sunset, Reprise, and Sunrise were. Those 3 tracks in order. I said them out of order, but that continuation, is blew my mind. It was late at night when I did my reaction. My wife was asleep. I woke her up to listen to it. I was like, you have to listen to these 3 songs in an order, and it's kind of a long listen, but you just have to listen to it from a sonic perspective. I'm not asking you to do a deep dive on the lyrics. We can do that another day because that's worth the time. But I just was like, what? I literally my head exploded. And so I think you need to release a version of that track without the cuts in it. I want to hear it without the cuts. I've been doing it on my DJ software just to listen to it without the break.
Well, And that's one. There's two runs on the album that really jumped out to me, and that was one of them. But I would add Remains in there on the end for that particular run.
Yeah, I mean, just that whole thing felt like a great episode.
Yeah, and so it certainly does represent like really from Throne to Sunset to Throne, Sunrise, Sunset, Reprise, and that really is just one song, right? I just separated them for sort of navigation, when we upload, but it's really just a 12-minute song, It's
phenomenal.
And then Remains right after that. They all really do kind of work together as like a block of records where you're starting with acknowledging, coming off of the GBAs, God is the throne, America bless God. Now, if you bless God, what does that mean? Praising him, elevating him in his rightful place in your heart and mind, which means what? He's on the throne. And you go from throne to sunrise. And when you have God on the throne, you have to wake up that morning and look at the world through the lens of him being on the throne. And when you do that, you can encourage yourself to press on each day, to not have your faith fail, and go throughout your whole day. And then sunset, what is a sunset? The sunset is the point where you're the furthest away from the sun. And that's when it gets dark, and so you go from that high point in the album of, May I Never Falter, because even though it's a high point, like even sonically and tempo and energy wise, it's still like a fighting in it, May I Never Falter is like, I'm still like fighting through life here. But then you get to, a sunset and it's like, okay, just like how Daniel, because Daniel's a huge inspiration, for this album, where he's praising God 3 times a day, and Nebuchadnezzar's son, right? That he stands up this decree at the behests of some elders and stuff in the kingdom that's trying to get Daniel. He's establishing the decree that, if you worship any other god, then you're going to be thrown in a lion's den, right? And so here you have Daniel in his room worshiping God, so that's why it starts off, even today I decided to get out the bed and go look at the dead all around me and pray. Right? Because why? Prayer is not to somebody who says that, oh, so you saw this evil and all this darkness and your reaction to that was to pray, not to take some dramatic world changing action. But sometimes something as simple as devotion and prayer and worship is the greatest act of rebellion that you can make when evil is trying to get you to submit to the idolatry of the age. And so in doing that, you start that day, in praise and worship, but then that later on, it's going to come. Doesn't matter. The sun is going to set, the darkness is going to come, and there's going to be some distance and the devil want to dance in it. And so you get to the end of the song, and I wanted to transition into Sunset with a little skit after Sunrise, after Sunrise, in order to just kind of level set the palette a little bit, because it is such a shift. So from going from that change in energy in the first part of Sunrise to the drop and change up with Mouthpiece, right? And then into the skit, it kind of allows you to come down and change mood almost and go into, Sunset, which then allows me to go into a very personal challenge and how the enemy wants to use those challenges, those personal challenges and difficulties to not just have us feel distance from the sun, but to run away from him intentionally, where he can isolate us and get us to compromise ourselves, because he can't compromise us. We compromise ourselves. And so that's really kind of the thought process in going from, Sunrise to Sunset in the Reprise. And then going into Remains, I felt like I actually wrote Remains and I had in my mind a way I was going to produce it. But I heard a track with a guitar. It was just a guitar alone. And I said, you know what? Let me use this. I think this may work. And so I started to just kind of mess around with it, test it, because I always intended it to be a very a different kind of sound coming off of Sunset, because Sunset is a very big, dramatic, heavy
cinematic
sound. And I didn't want, and it's because it's so long, it's fatiguing as well. I think it's a good fatiguing for me because I got to get things out of me that I really needed to express, and get out. But still, I didn't want to follow that sound up and that emotion with another 4 to 5 minutes of something that was just like it. Mm-hmm. And so I knew that the content of Remains is still not light, right? It's still not exactly the lightest of songs. But I wanted to change it in a way that made it easier on your ears, that way you still felt a shift in sound while still being familiar emotionally, you know what I mean, of where it was coming from, and I felt like that track did that, and I just built it up from that pure, acoustic guitar.
Yeah, I ended up sending that record to a friend of mine at work who I usually throw this out to people at work. I'll be like, hey, I can get you into Christian hip hop. Send me your top favorite songs of all time, any genre. Mm-hmm. And then I'll build the playlist off of like kind of the sonic sounds that they have. Uh-huh. And I sent him Remains because he sent me a lot of like country stuff when I did it for him. Uh-huh. And we live in Texas. And so I was like, hey, I think this might scratch your itch for this type of sound. This guy's album just dropped. His name's Jeremy. I think you should listen to the whole album, but here's a record to get you started. And he texted me back the next day. He's like, man, I listened to the song like 5 times in a row.
Wow. Wow.
So yeah, man, I think that record's incredible. And I've already been able to share it with someone to like get them interested.
Yeah.
Wow. Awesome.
Crazy good, man. The other run I wanted to ask you about is actually earlier in the album, tracks 3 through 6. Mm-hmm. So you got Paramount, you got Shine, shout out to 3. He's been on the show before. We're big fans of him. You got No Fair, and then Interpreted Dream, man. That's a run that is like I'm never even tempted to say, okay, let me get up to Remains real quick or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, talk about that run as well.
Yeah, man. And so Paramount is Paramount was the first song that I recorded for this album. I want to say I wrote Paramount somewhere around 16, 17. And so it's been there for a while, and to kind of get the ball rolling and kind of set the stage for, may I be good ground, found for your teaching, but starting it from a vulnerability, a place of vulnerability and a striving, to set a tone of striving. And I think that even looking at the first 3 chapters of Daniel and thinking about, the Hebrew men, you know what I mean? And them being in captivity, under Nebuchadnezzar, and the mentality that they had to have in order to be faithful, you know what I mean, to the commands and decrees of God, when the culture constantly wanted them to do the opposite thing. And their approach to that wasn't necessarily one full of pride and, beating my chest like, no, we serve the Most High God. I'm not doing this. Forget you. Rah, rah. It was more so like, you know what? Humbly, I'm going to obey, and I'm going to comply with what you're asking to a certain extent. You know what I mean? And when it gets to that point of disobedience, then I'm going to detach. And what it did is it allowed them to be respected, to gain favor, but to not dishonor God. And so when you have a record like Paramount is talking about how esteeming the standard of God and wanting his word to be rooted in our walk, to be rooted in his word and his way. And you go into something like Shine, is showing like, hey, I know where I am at. I know what I'm living in, but I still can make the best out of this. And I think they had to have approached each and every day with a mindset to maximize, their circumstances. And they did that, that they didn't eat what all of the other soldiers in training, was eating. They didn't eat the king's food, right? But they still excelled in everything that they did. So you don't have to partake in exactly what the culture is partaking. You don't have to partake in exactly what is being prescribed to you in order to still excel in the area that you're in and that the Lord has you in that moment. And so that's really what shine is about, you know, being light in darkness. We talked about it a little bit earlier with friendship, right? That, you know, that you can go and you can shine and by being faithful, you know, by being obedient, you know, by seeking the Lord wherever you are, resisting the things that are evil, you know, and marching forward. So that's really what that represents, kind of drawing inspiration from those first 3 chapters, really the first 2 chapters of Daniel, and Daniel being asked, you know, to interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dream, you know, and how they from being lights, right, they became people that could be looked to and called upon, you know, for the things of God or something spiritual and power and wisdom, you know, and practical knowledge, that because they were shining, because they were seeking the Lord and making his will for their lives paramount, then they were a light that someone looked to the king and called to help him when he needed help spiritually. And so in him calling him, interpret a dream comes about, you know, and I kind of, in that leads me into a place of, okay, what dreams, what things that we want God to interpret for us, right? Like interpreting a dream is a miracle. You know, that's a miracle. That's God interpreting, like that's somebody receiving a word from him and you being able to interpret it. That's a miracle. And so what are those many miracles that we need and that we've seen, you know, not just that we need or maybe praying for, or asking for currently, but that we've seen throughout the ages, that he has shown up time and time and time again and produced not only in the lives of his people historically, but even in our very lives, you know. And sometimes that distance from when we first got saved, or that distance from, you know, the last thing we prayed for and that we got, can make us forget, you know, and grow a callous around, you know, those areas of provision and grace and mercy that the Lord has given to us. So interpret a dream is just like, hey, okay, I have to call on God for similar things. It may not be for him to interpret a dream, but I need you to interpret this for me. You know, I need you to show up in this way and, you know, in a very real way for us, because we need you, because our lives may be on the line, maybe not in the same exact way that Daniel's was on the line, because they were facing literal actual death, right? But, you know, maybe our soul might be on the line, you know, if he doesn't interpret this thing in the way that we need it to be interpreted, you know, in our perspective and in our hearts and minds. So that's kind of, you know, the flow there for those 3 songs.
Man, I can't wait to re-listen to this. It's always refreshing to interview an artist after listening to a project, getting more context, and then going back and listening. It always makes that next listen a little more intimate, especially like I'm a very objective reviewer, Jeremiah. Like I think there's a difference, kind of to what Eric was saying earlier about how oh man, I just brain farted so hard, like it literally just came out. He was talking about how it's very rare for him to go back and re-listen to an album. I'm the same way. Like I don't have a problem doing like a reaction to something, but if I'm taking the time to go back, that's a big deal. But also it takes way more time for me. Like I'm going to invest in the projects that make me want to deep dive way more than the ones that don't.
Yeah.
And so one thing that's been great about your project is it's one that's fun to go back to and listen to. And kind of the point of what you're making on how you constructed the album in these runs, they're almost like little mini ministry tool belts for your listeners to like go and pull, right? Because, you know, when I do listen to Sunset, Sunrise, Sunset, Reprise, when I get to Reprise, like there's like a lament in there, but it also like a hope of like something to come. And that's been speaking to me a lot lately, that specific song, and then also Remains as well. But now that I'm even getting like your intentionality and thought process and how Daniel was such an inspiration for that, because I went in blind on this project. Like I had not listened to your other projects. I think my only exposure to you was on an Eshan project. And Luke DiMarzio was like, bro, you got to listen to this Jeremiah Bligen project coming out. And I was like, hey, man, since you're saying it, like, I'll listen to it. And I'm so glad I did. And I'm so glad we got to talk, because now that I know your heart behind it and how well you're able to articulate it, like, I just want to sit and chat with you all night about it. But we got things to move on to. But yeah, I love everything you just said. I think that really helps, at least for like guys like me who love to deep dive. Like, I'm going to enjoy it even more. Keep going.
Awesome. No, I appreciate it, bro. And I think, and also too, like, all of those things lead to Sunset in a very real way. Like, even in Sunset, where, you know, I talk about how, you know, John the Baptist and how the Israelites had a set expectation, you know, on how when God shows up, their whole life changes. Like, when he interprets a dream, like when he performs a miracle, there's a pillar of cloud by fire, right? There is a parting of a sea. You know, there's a quite literal earth shaking and life shifting thing that happens when the Lord fulfills his promises and he shows up for his people. And that ties into interpret a dream, because it's testifying about how God has shown up for me, and that not only how I still need him to do those things and I look to him, but the reason why I'm looking to him partially is because I've seen him work in these ways. It's establishing those expectations in my heart, even that, hey, when I pray and when we pray and we believe God and he provides for us, he does, because he really does in a real way. And it establishes those expectations, but sometimes those expectations betrays us and we become entitled to the grace of God in a way that makes us think that he's forsaking us in a way that abandons his character, that's without character, because we have established this thing with him that's really based on what he's done with us. But so it does tie together, you know, interpret a dream, even all the way down to Sunset, you know, that when I say things like, you know, that the tightrope that I'm walking on is attached to my faith, you know, and the expectations and conditions by which I came, like all of those things tie through, you know, back to those earlier songs as well, to show like how I built my own expectations of how God would show up in things that I didn't think would happen or come forth in my life. You know, that when I thought about, when you may think about a relationship, your marriage or being a father, you have something in your mind of how it's going to look based on the word of God, talking about believers here, right? Based on the word of God and based on your relationship with him as a loving father, and how the spirit of God being with us, we see him work in our lives in all of these very small, minor, sustaining ways, but also larger ones too. Yep. We see those things. Our belief in God is not without proof or evidence in our lives. And so when we get to these points where we feel like let down or broken over things that don't work the way that we want to, even though we pray, we fast, we did all of the same things we did before, right? Like I did the same thing the last time as somebody else did that got that dream interpreted, right? Mm-hmm. Or whatever the case may be. But this time, this cup is bitter in a way that it wasn't before, you know, and having to trust him, you know, because what is trust if it only is there when it feels good to you? You know, so all of those things definitely tie together, man. So I'm looking forward to, you know, hearing your thoughts, man, and chopping it up, bro.
Yeah, I gotta. I'll say one last thing, Eric, and then you can go. But Jeremiah, our last podcast, we talked about a topic that I brought up about like what's the sanctification role of the fan and artist? How should that look? And my argument was, this isn't a bad thing. It's there's never too much thing as an oversaturation of the gospel music. I've just seen Christian hip hop expand exponentially in the last 2 years. But with that comes a caveat of not all of the music is a mile deep, inch wide type of thing. Some of it's mile wide, inch deep. And that's not bad, because we need that for those type of people. That music is still a ministry tool for a certain aspect of people. And I was saying, there's some of guys like me who are seminary students or whatnot who like really want a higher level of like deep theological music that doesn't just say Jesus, 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 but that's like actually makes you like, it's almost designed with the sanctified Christian in mind as the artist. And this is a project that meets that standard for me. And so I think of guys like this project makes me want to go listen to your other projects, but I'm still on this project. I think of Deal and how he did. I've sent his project to people like, if you didn't tell me this was a Christian album, I wouldn't have known. It's like, well, it's because you don't know how to pick up biblical metaphor. And so you're not trained for that. But there's also Christians who don't know how to pick up biblical metaphor in music. And I think like you're at that level where it's still accessible to the person who doesn't know. Like I would easily send your project to people who don't listen to Christian hip hop, but like hip hop. And I could see them be like, wow, this was incredible. But I could also see them like not pick all this up, right? Because they're not informed.
For sure.
But I could also see me sending this to a Christian hip hop fan and them being like, I didn't get it. Because I think we're training the Christian hip hop audience to enjoy 90-second songs that are catchy and vibey and have a very like formulaic model to its writing style, where you came out and you wrote a movie in my mind and kept it extremely theologically deep for someone like me who like will nerd out on that stuff. So
well, and what Swiss just did is set up the last question I wanted to ask you, and that is, like I said, whenever I listened to this, I was like, whoa, hold on, this is different, and that's part of what kept drawing me back to it. Was there any concern at all on your end when you were like, I don't know, this doesn't sound like the majority of Christian hip hop right now? Like, was that, did that even cross your mind? Did it matter at all?
Yes and no. And so it crosses my mind because I've always been aware, kind of that the way that I do music and how I sound, is not conventional. It never has really sounded like other things, even if there were similarities somewhere in it. I've always tried to approach my music in a way to make it authentic. Like, why are you listening to me? To me specifically, out of all of these millions of artists out here.
I wish more artists asked that question of
like
themselves.
You want to listen to my album, hopefully, because it sounds like me, and I know it doesn't sound like me, and I'm okay with that, meaning that it's not for people, right? There are some people who didn't like Thriller. There are some people who doesn't like whatever the biggest artist is ever. There are people who didn't enjoy a lot of their work, and that's okay because we all have preferences. It's the job of me as an artist, I believe, to represent myself artistically, in a way that is authentic to who I am, how I hear music, and let it fall where it may. Like it is for who it's for, and I don't have to be everything to everybody. I just need to be who I'm supposed to be, and let me plant these seeds. Let me water whatever seeds may be there, and God will bring the increase. And I really can't make creating music about building platform or necessarily pleasing, the ear, because people's taste buds change. You can have 2 years of the sound, one sound being dominant, and then somebody else comes with, a dash of salt over here where it wasn't one before, and now it's changed up. And here you have an album full of records that you just made based on the last 2 years, and so sonically. And so, I can't do it because I find you running kind of chasing your tail, constantly trying to make it sound like something else, and something else is not my standard. I appreciate something else. I value how other artists sounds and I enjoy it, but I don't copy it, because I trust what God has put inside of me, that whether or not it's 5 people, whether it's 5 people or 500 people or 5,000 people, that those are the people that I'm going to be in front of, you know what I mean? And I'm going to serve that group of people to the best of my ability, whether it be in person or whether it be sonically, And so yeah, man, I'm definitely keenly aware that it is even on the scope of like different sounding albums, this is like way out there, and especially when you start talking hip hop, you know what I mean, and rap music, I totally Totally get it, man. And I can respect the people that say like, yo, Jeremiah, bro, like you got like one song sub 4 minutes here, bro. And it might be an interlude. Like, my God, you can't do that. Right. I get it. I get all of the industry things. You know what I mean? Like I understand the 3-minute format, the 3.5-minute format, the 33 minute average runtime of the album in 2025 or 2024. Right. I totally get all of that. It's just that I am choosing here to just say, you know what? I'm going to just make this the way that I receive it, the way that I hear it. That's how I'm going to make it. I'm not going to, I'm not going to make Sunset 4 minutes because my album's already too long. I'm going to actually not only not make it 4 minutes, I'm going to do everything that I hear on this song. I'm just going to do it. And if this ends up being 15 minutes, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it. Why not? If somebody doesn't like it, they can click skip.
Yeah.
I think that really comes through. I think that comes through. Like, that's something I thought about as I was listening to it. I was like, I haven't heard anything like this all year. I haven't heard a project this tight and cohesive at this length in probably since Jared's album that comes out later this year that I've heard. Mm-hmm. Like, other than that, like, I really haven't heard artists in this. You're right. Like, that's not the format. Like, it's almost frowned upon to make a project that long. But for guys like Eric and I, we're like, no. I'm going to carve out an hour and a half and listen to this because it's like watching a movie.
Yeah, well, no, I appreciate it.
And I'll say this, and I don't mean this in a negative way. So if anyone takes it that way, then that's on you, I guess. But there's some people out here, there's some rappers out here that want to be artists, but they're rappers. Okay, and that's fine. But you're a rapper. They're going hot. However, fall into the category of you're an artist that raps as a tool to create that art, right? I think that's what distinguishes, I guess, just the view and the level of esteem that you lend to some people, right? Like I said, some people just need to be rappers. That's fine. That doesn't bother me. Whenever I'm in the mood for just someone that can rap, cool. But whenever I want something that's different, that's gonna challenge me and make me feel something more, where I have to stop what I'm doing to be actually engaged in it. That's new. That's a different level of stuff, man. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, that only happens like once or twice a year if we're lucky. You know, we happen to get Swoop's album this year as well, which I think fits that standard.
It's a great album.
And I think Beal's album fits that standard too. Yep. But like the fact that, like,
shout out to three on that too.
Yep.
Yeah. And even some other, like, you had Mouthpiece on the project. He dropped a fire EP.
Fantastic EP.
Has no skips. Yep. I'm like, man, my only critique is I want more.
Wish it was longer.
Yeah. And then I bet you and him had a completely different conversation about project length.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, I think.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna sneak in there really quick about just project length, man. I think just to encourage people to just do what you feel, man, as a creative and as an artist. Like, I know that we know people in attention spans, we would say, oh, this generation, microwave generation, they don't want things to be long, but that's not exactly true. It's not true, because those same exact people will sit down and binge watch 8 hours of television on one day. Those same exact people will sit in a movie theater and watch 3 hours of the Avengers and not move, not get up, not walk, forget, pause, and not listen or what. So it's not about the attention span necessarily. It's really about us artists taking on the challenge to engage the senses of the listener, because the reason why we can watch certain visual platforms is because it's engaging different things in us. And so I think that when we endeavor to say, okay, I'm going to make this, but it's not going to be 90 minutes of the same sound. You know, you're going to feel different along the way. It's going to engage different parts of you, you know, and hopefully that will keep your attention, you know, throughout it. You know, if we try just to the best of our ability, you know, but do it at the end of the day, you know, the best they can do is press fast forward, you know, but the best that you can do is become yourself truly. and uninhibited, and in a world, in a creative marketplace where you have the freedom to do whatever you want to creatively. Why create within limits when you don't have to?
Preach.
Why put those limits on yourself? Like, you look at the Psalms. Like the Psalms, some Psalms are one paragraph, and some of them are 16, right? Like God, look at how God writes. He writes dynamically. When you go Genesis to Revelation, he's dynamic with his pen and how he weaves in and out of things and how it all connects. Like, use him as our model and our muse, and be free. Use your Christian freedom to freely create. And let the market adapt to you. And if it doesn't, then that's okay. God will send who needs to be sent, but build it.
Beautiful.
Yeah, man. We appreciate you hanging out with us. Doors open to come back anytime you feel like it, man. We'll just say that. Just real quick, man, like let them know, man, how do they go support, get connected, all those good things.
Yeah, so everything, my TikTok, Facebook, IG, X, everything is Jeremiah Bligen. My website is jeremiahbligen.com. That's Jeremiah like in the Bible, and Bligen like in Mary J. Blige with an N at the end of it. Right? And so just follow me on everything. I also have a mailing list that I send out email blasts as well. But definitely just stay connected that way. And I'll continue to work and release content as time progresses.
Love it, man. Love it. Swiss, what a way to kick off the new year, dude.
Yeah, man. This was a happy surprise. I didn't know Jeremiah was going to be on until yesterday. And I was like, oh, sweet. I can't wait. And so, this was fun, man. Thanks for coming. I hope to have another chat with you another time about other things. Like, you just sound like a dude I would like have a long coffee with.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Any time, bro. Just hit me up and we certainly can do that. We're brothers in the faith, and we got a lot of commonality already just from, being in the faith, having the same father, and having the same interest in music, in this music. So definitely hit me up.
You're in North Carolina?
Charlotte. Yes, sir.
Okay. So you're by Mitch Durrell?
Mitch is outside of Charlotte, I think, though.
Yeah, like
he's in North Carolina. Yeah, I think he's just outside of Charlotte. But Cutright is my good friend.
I love Cutright.
Yeah, yeah. Cutright is in Charlotte. Well, he moved out of the city, but it's technically still Charlotte. But
you a big little brother guy?
No, not really, but I appreciate them. And here's why. Let me say this though, because I don't want to end with that. Like, not because of any type of stylistic thing. It's just that when they became prominent and where I was as a human being, you know what I'm saying? And my taste palettes, like I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, so I'm from South, and so there we have your Pastor Troy, your No Limit, your Cash Money, with a sprinkle of Wu-Tang in there, with a sprinkle of Nas in there every now and then, some Outkast. You have, a whole different type of vibe that they're going off of down there, as well as some kind of, some 3-6 Mafia and all of that stuff. And then you got 50 Cent and all of these people coming around. So my palette was a lot different as a youth. Okay. You know what I mean? Sense, and it wasn't until I became an adult and I actually started to study hip hop abroad, in my early years in college, as a adult college student, taking some hip hop classes and everything too. Like, I actually began to seek out different artists to say, okay, I'm going to go back and listen to all of their content. And so I have engaged and interacted with their music in a way that was to like, oh, let me check them out. You know what I mean? Like, let me check them out. Let me understand who they are. Let me understand their vibe and what they did, versus being a 15-year-old in high school listening to their music for the first time and now you hooked. You see what I'm saying? My experience wasn't what different. So high levels of respect for them. Like, I think they're phenomenal. You know what I'm saying? But in terms of the connection with their content.
Interesting. Well, that's weird because I'm from Oakland. And so, but they opened for the Roots on the Roots Phrenology tour. And that was a week before the Listening came out. that I saw them open, and me and my friend were like, "Who are these guys?" And like, I went and bought their album at Rasputin Records the next week when they're like, "Hey, it's dropping next week, go buy it." I was like, "Yep," and I've just been a fan ever since. And then that turned me on to more mid East Coast that sector of hip hop is a very different palette than New York or Southern East Coast rap, and so it's just an interesting palette, like Justice League, Crisis, all those guys, and even like Pastor Troy and No Limit. Like, that's just a different sound than everywhere else that I was getting.
Fellas, the only artist you're allowed to actually like from that area is Petey Pablo. So let's get that.
Oh, I haven't heard that name in a while.
Raise up, Swiss. Raise up.
Oh gosh.
So, anyway, yeah, man, it's been good stuff, man. Y'all already know what it is. Like I said, make sure if you're not, get signed up for our Substack, FiveTwentyClub.com/Substack. You can get signed up for free. We got stuff coming to your inbox, man. We want to make sure it gets to you. If you like what is happening at the show, you want to put a little bit back into it, you can actually sign up as a paid member at our Substack and become a producer. So consider doing that. That would be awesome. What a way to kick off 2025. We're excited. Like we said, a lot of stuff that we did in 2024 with IXC. We'll see what happens this year, man. But we're going to go ahead and get up out of here, man. I want to thank everyone for hanging out with us here at 520 IXC. For my guys, Big Swiss and King David the Vessel. This is Eric Boston. Y'all already know what is indie Christian culture. Let's go.
Good night, y'all.